most of what I spend my days doing is working with students who intend to go into health professions. And I'm trying to help them to understand the reality of the experiences of patients and their families before they ever become a healthcare professional, because I think that will help them to begin to close that communication gap that I observed when I was a patient, when I was a caregiver.
Hard work, hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day.
Welcome once again to another Work Ethic podcast. And I am here today with Dr. Lindy Davidson, and just a couple kind of like highlight bio things. So I just pulled these right off of your bio online. So you're still in the Judy Genshaft Honors College, right?
Yes, Judy Genshaft Honors College.
Did I say that right? Genshaft?
Yeah.
Say it?
Genshaft, there's no
Genshaft.
R.
There's no R? Scribble
Former
that
president
out.
of USF.
Genshaft. Yes. And I should know that. And are you a dean now?
I'm an associate dean.
Associate dean. Still coming up that ladder. So a couple things here. So you have a BA in communication arts, and you did a minor in religion also, right?
That's right.
An M.Div at Reformed Theological Seminary.
That is correct.
That'll be interesting to circle back to. And then a Ph.D. in communications, and you focused in on health communications.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So why don't you do this? So for those listening, look, Lindy and I are friends. We know each other. We've done some stuff together. I'm just excited to have squirreled away some time to hang out and catch up. Right. But I also want to like walk through this as I really want to have this kind of conversation around what we've been doing with the work ethic and hear about your work and your relationship with work. But why don't you go ahead and beyond the LinkedIn profile, just like, who are you? Introduce yourself a little bit deeper.
One time I was at like this women's retreat thing, and they wanted us, I think we were supposed to write a poem about who we are. And the first lines that came to me were, farm girl, never ever a glam girl. And so maybe that's who I am. I don't know. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, or a medium town by Kentucky standards. So I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky, on a farm. Went to a rural high school, graduated in a class of 123, but with some pretty high achieving peers, as it later turned out. So my classmates graduated from Duke Law School and are, civil engineering leaders and, water systems, and NASA scientists who now teach, literally like rocket science. So that's pretty cool to have been raised and to grow up with these as these peers of mine, because I think we really did challenge one another to reach higher and higher for things. But I graduated from high school as the salutatorian, so second place. I have like a kind of a running theme of second place. It was the second child, and
all right
second to get the high scores in high school. And then I went to Belmont University in Nashville, which is where the debates were hosted last night, actually.
Oh, really?
So my alma mater.
Okay.
And so I entered college wanting to be a public relations professional for a Major League Baseball team. That was my goal.
Obviously.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what every 18-year-old girl wants to be?
Yeah.
But my dad was a baseball coach and a scout for the Cincinnati Reds, and I had grown up around baseball. I'd been an umpire, played softball, was just very excited about the game. And so I thought this would be a way that I could be a part of that, because I had worked in the newspaper. I was the editor of my high school newspaper and enjoyed writing and like the mass comm kind of journalism thing. I always enjoyed writing, like creatively writing particularly. So I started down the road in that journalism major, and it just wasn't as much fun as I kind of, the journalism world and what was being asked of me wasn't exactly thrilling me. But I discovered a kind of don't know, I was just kind of enlivened to the larger world. When I was in middle school, I had traveled with my dad's baseball team to Puerto Rico. And it was the first time I ever spoke Spanish for a purpose.
Mm.
Like, I wanted to communicate something to someone, and the person didn't speak English, and I knew the word in Spanish, and so I said it, and it like allowed me to see that there was another world out there. There's another way to communicate, another way to express myself, and that was really exciting. It's really kind of funny that like that one little encounter had so much meaning. I was probably in 8th grade, and I said the word "ton." I mean, one syllable, but the woman knew what I meant. And so I found this access to another language. And so then the summer after my freshman year in high school, I spent the whole summer in Springdale, Arkansas, which is in the Ozarks, with a family who were from El Salvador. So I spent the whole summer working with them. He was the pastor of a congregation, actually of like 2 or 3 different congregations of people in that area. And I got to know a lot of migrant families and people who had come to the U.S. Looking for more opportunities and were struggling through to figure out what that looked like, and living with this family who had escaped from, they came to the U.S. for political asylum. Because
the Contra Wars and things like that.
Yeah.
Is that about the timeline?
Their son, who was 6 when they came over, had a scar from a gunshot wound.
Yeah.
So this was, very, very scary, their life had been. So it kind of opened my eyes up to other things happening in the world, and really built this skill set of, Spanish speaking and understanding other cultures. And so I went back to school, and I realized I still had these communication skills that I wanted to develop, but that maybe I didn't want to work as a PR, executive, and I didn't necessarily want to do that in a for-profit kind of institution. I wasn't interested in climbing the business ladder.
Yep.
So I just kept going to school. I picked up a religion minor, and I graduated with a want to do more. So then I went and worked in a church as a youth minister for a couple years in Texas, and decided that I ran out of that religion minor real quick. Like, all I knew was taken up in those couple years. And so I went to seminary. And in between all that, by the way, I also got married. So I got married after my junior in college, not high school.
Okay.
College.
All right.
And so my husband and I went back to Texas, where he's from, and then we moved to Florida because we were both interested in seminary. And so.
Did he also go to seminary?
Yeah, he did, but then stuff happened. So I went together. We started together. He decided someone should probably make money so that we could like pay the rent and stuff. So he had a teaching certification by that point. So he went back to school, or went back and started teaching full time, so that we could, eat and stuff. It's important like that.
Yeah.
And then after 3 years in seminary, I graduated, and he started back full time. I was working. I got pregnant with our first son, and then everything blew up when I went for my sonogram, and they told us there were huge problems. So that's when our world took a very, very different, everything came into a very different focus by that point. Yeah, so I don't remember what the question was, but
this is good. Thanks for just rolling. I'm like, I was like, introduce yourself. And I'm like, there's I think, well, so had you, there was so much there that we need to kind of circle back to, but just there where you ended, had you finished seminary and then got pregnant?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated in 2001, May of 2001, right before 9/11.
Yep.
And then Will was born in June of 2002.
Okay.
By March of 2002, there were things that we knew were not good. I was hospitalized April 15th of 2002. He was born on June 3rd, so that made me a patient for 7 weeks in a hospital. which if you think the pandemic is every day the same, try living in a hospital for 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Feeling physically pretty much fine, but having this like kind of peril inside of you. And, you know, the menu changed. And it didn't change very often. It was pretty bad. So it was a very odd time in my life, but I learned things as a patient in the hospital that you cannot learn in a school or any other way. I mean, there is an education that is afforded to some people that other people just will not have access to. And I don't mean in an institution.
That's right.
Necessarily. I mean, like this, just an experience that no doctor, you know, has this kind of an experience of being in that bed, yet they're called to have to deal with these, you know, situations, which is what brought me to my PhD program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like how to communicate around some of these topics and listen to patients. And so I also spent just under 7 weeks in the hospital, I think, when I had my car accident. Now, I did not feel mostly well. So I spent a good chunk of that time just on drugs, basically, you know, pumped full of painkillers and this and that. But to this day, have these very strange feelings when I walk through a hospital. Like it's not a place I really want to be, right? Like I learned to be like, I'm good. I could tough anything out. But there is like a mental thing I have to do in a hospital to this day where I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like, I'm not gonna let that happen, but there's something trying to happen when I'm in a hospital to this day.
I had kind of the opposite response. Maybe
Yeah.
because I was a patient and then I was the caregiver of a patient.
Yeah, sure.
So I was in there for 7 weeks, but Will was in there for 4.5 months in a neonatal intensive care unit. So every day I went home and then I came back. And then I get up in the middle of the night and I call the hospital and see how he was doing.
Yeah.
The next morning I would get up and I would drive in to Orlando. We were in Orlando at the time. Drive into Orlando, spend all day at his bedside, turn around, go back home. So I did that for 4.5 months, every single day. And it gave me this incredible familiarity with this place as a place that I just come and go. I mean, there are people who work in that hospital now who probably do not know parts of it that I know. Yeah. Even with remodels and all these different things, you know, like there are back stairwells and places I could find and traverse. But then, you know, so Will is 18 now. So this is obviously a long time ago.
Yeah.
After him, we thought, well, that was so much fun. We should have more kids. So we had 2 more kids. They did not have to go in the NICU. In fact, they were like over 9 pounds each at birth. I mean, trauma in another direction, but they were healthy and well. And when my youngest son went to kindergarten, that was the day I started my PhD. I dropped him off at school and I drove to Tampa. So
I love this.
But in the few years like prior to that, I told my husband one day, I remember I said, you know, in 20 years, I'm going to go back and get a PhD and do something about this, you know, all these communication problems in the hospital. And he said, why are you going to wait 20 years? Why don't you go now? He may regret those words. I'm not sure, but I took him to heart and I started looking around and I found a really great health communication program in my backyard. Yeah. And I was like, well, I can go there. And so I started studying. My PhD work really focused on families and how families navigate health and healthcare. And then my dissertation was on how parents make decisions about seriously ill hospitalized children based on their spiritual frameworks. So that's a pretty specific area, but
so I want to get into a million things you've said, so we're gonna need to like start picking back at some of this.
Okay,
but like no, please keep talking. But I want to ask you, because even as you said, how parents navigate this healthcare system, how they make these hard decisions based on their spiritual framework. And the question that I had as you went from seminary, so youth pastor, seminary, kind of have this like maybe a year trying to work, and then you have this child and you go, well, everything changed. Now I don't know like what that, I can't imagine what that was like for you as an experience, but from my own experience of pain and struggling and hospitalization and trauma and whatever, I know that it was very hard to deal with in general. And I'm just curious, like, how did you handle that in regard to your spiritual framework? Like, did that feel like it was dying? Did that support you through it? Like, talk to me about, like, you got prepped for this season maybe, right? But what happened for you?
Yeah. So, they talk about, the space between your head and your heart is roughly like 18 inches, probably more like 15 on me. I'm not very big. So, I went to seminary because I have this insatiable curiosity. And in my family, you go to school to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
My parents were always in school, getting another degree, doing another thing. We lived out in the country in Kentucky, but my parents both have master's degrees. My mom had education beyond that. They just were always going to school. And so I wanted more. My faith was very strong and active, and I wanted to dig deeper, and I'm a thinker, and I loved theology. I had a little taste of it in my minor in my undergrad, and so I was like, I want more of that. So I went to school, and I learned so much, and it was a really lovely time for me because I had grown up in the church and heard the stories, like all the stories that you've ever been to Sunday school, you get like Moses in the water in the basket, and then you get like the burning bush story, which is also Moses, but you don't even necessarily realize it because they're told to you in these like very individual
vignettes. Yep.
And then here's the behavior that you're supposed to learn from this story, boom, done, over. And so you don't see how all of this fits together. And seminary helped me to see a much larger kind of organizing principle of how everything fit together into a larger story of identity and dignity and pursuit and love and forgiveness and hope and joy. And it was a very rich time for me. I really loved the people I was in school with and the professors that I was able to sit with. One professor who would sit outside with us at some tables on our break from class, and our break would end up being like 30 minutes long because we get into some conversation that was just deep and meaningful, and he'd be like, oh, look at the time, we got to go back to class.
You're really easy to do that with too, by the way. Like, yeah I can see that happening.
I have been told that I have the gift for gab, but I think that may go on the other side of life too. So but yeah, so it was a great time, but nothing had ever happened to me. Like, there'd never been any major trauma in my life. My grandparents were all still alive. I didn't lose a grandparent until I was over 30. And so like everything was just like, nothing was super easy, but nothing was really traumatic or hard in my life. We had food to eat. We had a house that was old and kind of scary at times, but it was a roof. And so it was not, there's just nothing to really apply to the hardship. I remember reading 2 Corinthians with my classmates about, struggle and sacrifice and pain. And I just couldn't relate.
Yeah.
And then
right.
I got faced with the largest challenge of my life. You find out you're going to have a baby, and this is like this life, and you suddenly feel responsible and out of control. And then you find out now that this life is threatened, and you really feel responsible and out of control. And so I had to decide, laying in that hospital bed, if I really could lean on the thing that I said I believed. Like, did it really matter when life got hard?
And the rubber hits the road now. Yeah.
And what I found was that it really did, because there was nothing left of me.
Yeah.
Like, I had nothing left of my own steam by that point. And I can muster a lot of steam for a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just barrel through life, super enthusiastic, like there's a positive to be found in everything, and very optimistic. But then in that bed, we had a doctor tell us that our baby could be born, take one breath, his lungs would explode and you would die. That's a hard thing to swallow.
Yeah.
So we were hearing things like this all the time. And I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to know that like my circumstances don't change like the full scope of what reality is and what truth, is. And so I had to just lean on what I had learned to be true, what I said I believed to be true. And that was really basic stuff like that, that I was loved, that I was capable of loving other people, that no matter what happened, that there was still an opportunity for me to be blessed and be a blessing, and to be related to people and to, make good on an opportunity that was my life. So the way I describe it oftentimes is that I had lived as though we live in a square room, like if life is a square room, but that the square room is lit by a circle so that, you only know what's going on in the circle of light. And there are these 4 dark corners.
Yep.
And we just stay in the light because we want to be in a place where we're familiar and we know what's going on.
That's right.
And it was as though someone grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and shoved my face in the corner. And what the fear is that, God exists in this little circle of light and good things are here in this circle of light, but don't you dare get out of it. And when I had my face shoved into the corner, what I realized wasn't that like God would follow me into the corner and be with me there too. It was that he was already there. Like I already had comfort and hope and security, even in places where I couldn't see what was going on.
Yeah.
And so that was really kind of like the enactment of what I believe to be true, and the moment that I had to say, well, faith means like stepping out when you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And I'd always felt like I knew it was going to happen. So now that I don't know what's going to happen, can I actually walk this way?
Let me jump from that, because you saying like I really don't know what's going to happen, and you painted the picture of like, okay, well I had Will, and then I had these two other kids. You even said like they were big and trauma in another direction or whatever, but like kids is a good example of like there's something about an open receptivity of a gift, right? There's like, I am going to receive something. I don't know what's going to happen. Right. And okay, so this is going to be a bit maybe weird of a transition, but I watched your like video online, your bio video on the USF website.
Okay.
All right. You said something that reminded me of something else. So I want to start with the something else, because that something else is on this point of not knowing what you're going to get, which is Forrest Gump. He says, life's like a box of chocolates.
That's
You
right.
never know what you're going to get. And there's something cool about that, right? There's something like, okay, that's true. You don't know what you're going to get. And there's a certain openness, a certain vulnerability to that, a certain openness to surprise, a certain sobriety about reality. There's something really cool about that. And people love Forrest Gump, whatever. But what you said stood out to me. Do you remember what you said life is like? Okay.
Site.
It's like a construction. Yeah, it's like a construction site. And I immediately thought of Forrest Gump and put those in conversation with each other, because that has, well, will and determination and intentionality and looking at what's the blocks. So you said, oh, you have lots of different blocks, and some seem like they don't fit and some do fit. And so I as I look at your, even as just the profile we read in the beginning, going communications, theological seminary, and I'm like, okay, preacher, right? And then you're like, I had this life experience, health communication. Okay, teacher. like there's a way in which it kind of makes sense, but they also don't. If you just look at the list, you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so I was wondering, like, I wanted to ask you just one, to present that to you as like a contrast, to muse on as these two true proverbial type statements. And then just talk to me about, I don't know, what is within, because it reminds me of the Serenity Prayer. Like, do what you can with what is in your control, and you are vulnerable to what is outside your control. And I don't know, I wanted to like put that back to you that way, to go, yeah, continue to like expound on that.
So, and often I teach with Legos. So
Okay.
if you could see me right now, I'm in a very colorful setting, which I like bright colors. I also teach on end of life, so I have to offset that a little bit sometimes. But yeah, I do like the image of life being like a construction site, because that is, when I look back on my life, like, things make perfect sense to me. Most of what I spend my days doing is working with students who intend to go into health professions. And I'm trying to help them to understand the reality of the experiences of patients and their families before they ever become a healthcare professional, because I think that will help them to begin to close that communication gap that I observed when I was a patient, when I was a caregiver. And I'm still a caregiver, you know, and still sometimes a patient, like aghast at the things that may happen. But I could not have written this story. Like, there is no way I could have come up with this topsy-turvy path that I have been on. But when I look back on it, it does make sense to me.
Yeah.
I see how the opportunity for this theological education, which I kind of thought was going to get sidelined when I started my Ph.D. program at a large public university, that I wasn't even sure was going to accept this Master's of Divinity.
What kind of degree is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, you studied God?
Exactly.
Okay.
If you say, well, I learned Greek and Hebrew, then they start to go, okay, never mind. You
Yeah,
know?
I got my Latin. That'll overlap, whatever. Yeah.
So, when I started looking into potential PhD dissertation topics, I had a palliative care physician tell me, we really need someone to look at the spirituality aspect of families and how that matters to them when they're going through this. And you have this whole Master's of Divinity, so you should be well equipped to do that. And I was like, oh,
yes.
that
Sounds
fit,
awesome.
after all. So
Yeah.
the palliative care team, like, which is who I shadow for my dissertation, a chaplain is a member of a palliative care team. And they're looking at like holistic care for seriously ill patients. So you have social workers and chaplains and physical therapists and nurses and doctors all kind of coming together to support this whole like family system around a complicated illness. It was something I didn't have access to when my kid was sick, but now exists in a lot of hospitals for children, which is really great. I mean, it exists for adults too, but for children, it's a really great service. And so when I realized how that piece fit, it was kind of an aha moment. Like, I could make sense of it in my own personal life, but how this was going to matter for anybody else, I wasn't really sure. But being able to talk to these parents who were struggling, I realized how important this was. I mean, spirituality was clearly very important to me. Why wouldn't I think it would be important to a lot of other people too? And it was from different faiths and different ways, but I could see how it's kind of this ongoing theme throughout everyone that I talked to. They were leaning on something beyond just the medical science. And so it made a lot of sense, but I think everyone's life can make sense in this way. If you look at what you have had delivered to your construction site that you didn't really want there, like, we have agency, especially in the United States. I mean, we prize our independence and freedom, and, you know, we say, you do you and I'll do me and all of that. And I think there's a lot of issues with that and a lot of problems that we create for ourselves in trying to be so independent. But what we have is a lot of freedom to choose what we want. I chose my college major. I chose to go to seminary. I chose to get my PhD. These are things that I wanted to do, and I have brought these blocks to my construction site with, in some cases, extreme effort. But then other things get brought to you. You know, someone in your family gets really sick, or your house floods. There's a natural disaster of some kind. Your best friend goes through a trauma and you get completely entrenched in that. I mean, we cannot control the phone call that's going to come 5 minutes from now. It's just not possible.
Yep.
And so we can't just eschew those things as not being a part of my plan. I think it's much better for us to look at that and say, okay, I didn't expect that, but where does it fit? You know, I have to accept it, whether I expected it or not. I have to accept that this is a reality. And so how can I move forward with this reality in a way that, you know, claims it as something that is mine to live with, but that maybe is going to help somebody else, or maybe is just going to be something that is hard for me, but if I acknowledge it, it'll be a lot more palatable for me to move forward than if I pretend like it's not there.
Mm.
And I think that matters in terms of work too, to kind of come back to your theme. I spent 11 years not working, you know, but I was working harder than I'd ever worked in my life. You don't get paid to go to the hospital and sit by a bedside every day for 4.5 months. In fact, it's incredibly expensive to do that. You know, we were fortunate enough that, you know, a preterm baby qualifies for Medicaid. And, you know, we had access to private insurance through the generosity of a couple of employers who were also nonprofits, but managed to make it work for us. But in the amount of time that I lost the opportunity to earn income for my family, I spent over $500 in tolls the year that Will was born. I mean, it's expensive to do that, but that work did not go, it wasn't for nothing. Like that informs every single class that I teach right now. I would not be sitting in this office. I would not be in my classrooms. I would not have relationships with my students. I wouldn't lead trips to the Dominican Republic with students on, you know, on medical trips. I wouldn't do any of that if all of this hadn't happened. And it was working towards something in my life. It's not just me working. Life is working. And I think that is important to acknowledge when you, like for my students who feel like life will begin when they become a doctor. It's just not true. Everything that's happening right now is life. This is informing who you become tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I'll stop talking now because I'm just running on at the mouth.
You know, this is so good. So, yeah, let me pick, there's like too much. Let me pick up on the students for a second. Because, you know, I don't know, and maybe this is presumptuous, but these medical students, life will begin when they're a doctor. I just think of students I've interacted with, there's like a fast track to a well-paying job that in many, many ways, it's in a field of helping and care, working in a place named after words like hospitality. And yet that isn't necessarily the spirit with which all of those students are aiming at those goals, right? And just being young, like part of just all of us when we're young, we're kind of into ourselves and we're thinking about what's good for us, and life hasn't happened to us in that way. And I know you're trying to do something. Like I see when you and I have been, you know, you were doing, so we'll run through some things you did, like this pre-college thing that we worked together, and we could talk about that in a little bit. But like I watch you go, I'm trying to impact these students in a way that affects the trajectory of their college experience. And then I hear you talk about what you're trying to do in engaging with students as you know they're going into these fields, and you go, I had this experience in there. So God forbid you get there and you're like this, right? Like I have a role to play here in shaping tomorrow's hospitals or whatever, or care units. What's that like? Like how, how, talk to me about that work in the interpersonal with students. Cause like my experience, I worked with college students for a long, long time and still overlap with them tremendously as volunteers and things like that. And go, there's like people that are very open, people that are very like receptive to leadership. And then there's knuckleheads, right? There's people that's like, man, I don't know how to crack this nut. And, and yet you have like some kind of a responsibility there. And I don't know, I just would like there's enough in what you said before this. I want to keep kind of coming back to that if I can, my memory can do that. But like, can you just speak to this job of engaging students with this like fire and passion and conviction you have? I can only imagine the despair in certain interactions with actual college students.
Well, okay, first of all, I'm incredibly spoiled by the college students we have in the Judy Genshaft Honors College. So I love my students. Now, can they be knuckleheads sometimes? Yes, they can. You are.
I was gonna say I met some of them. You're not gonna kid me. You can do your PR thing, but I'm gonna ask you more questions. Go on.
Yeah. So they can be. They're. Everybody has their points of frustration or difficulty. A few things that I really love about this particular location of Tampa is the diversity that's represented here, but also the sense in which, like, if you were to go to some other schools and meet the students who were pre-med, who were, top of their class, cream of the crop, high test scores, this is, which is what makes up our group, you would probably find a lot of kids who grew up very similarly, upper middle class to upper class students who had been afforded a lot of opportunity. Our students are not defined by that. Many of our students are first generation Americans. They have had a very different life experience. Some of them are actually, I had a student who became a citizen while in my class. Like, this is in the global awareness and different cultural understandings of what it means to be a student, what it means to be a professional, is really enriching, because anybody who has grown up with that privilege kind of gets awakened to the fact that everybody didn't grow up like that, because they get to hear other stories and other ways of understanding. And we also have a lot of students who are from our area and who are still responsible for, like, caring for another member of their family, who have, to work while going to school, because otherwise they won't be able to afford to be here. And so they have a different relationship with what it means to be a student and what it means to have a career and have earning potential down the road. So I appreciate that as a difference of our students. But most of our students come to me and say, well, I want to help people. Like, I hear this as a common refrain. I want to help people. I want to be a doctor and I want to help people. And I love that, because it's an opportunity for me to dispel the myth that just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you're always doing it to help people.
Or that you are actually helpful.
Or that you're actually helping people. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we look at, like, well, what does that mean? Help people's a really big kind of umbrella. Hopefully we're all helping people, right? Why wouldn't we want to do that with everything we do in life? And so we began to break down, kind of like, well, what does that mean? And the best thing that I do is to take them away from this place and go introduce them to someone else who helps people in a way that just blows their mind. And I mentioned the Dominican Republic earlier.
Mhm.
So I have partnered with, or Honors College has partnered with an initiative in the Dominican Republic with a physician, Reginald Carroll. So Dr. Carroll has the Carroll Initiative for Community Health, and he and his team go to rural and impoverished areas around the north coast of the DR in order to bring medical care to people who otherwise would not receive it, but then also to engage with them to improve their quality of life through education, through putting concrete floors in people's homes that are living on dirt, through providing nutrition, community gardens, like any number of different ways, water filtration systems. Like, he's a public health worker. Like, this is what he does. He's just, his lens is, how do I help the whole community be healthier? And that's really the frame of public health, not just physician. But most of our students don't come to school thinking, I'm going to go work in public health, because they don't know what that is. They know what a doctor is. But most students come to college thinking you could be one of about 5 different things. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or whatever your parents were, right? Like, those are the options that are on the table. And so when they think about helping people and being a doctor, it's because that's the only box that made sense in that very large category.
Yeah.
So I get to introduce them to a doctor, but who's doing doctoring in a very different kind of way. And then they get a Dominican experience, which is amazing and I love. And we have, these ongoing relationships. They stay with families. They become enlivened to a different culture and way of life that is not physical resource rich, but is quite rich in love and care and concern for others. And so that is one of the things that I add to their educational experience that kind of just wrecks their whole view of what it means to be a doctor.
Well, and I could say from my own experience, I was in college at the time, but it wasn't related to my college education. But my own trajectory was completely shaped by being taken to a few places. One of which was just 2 places that homeless people were locally. So I went to like some meal sites and got to just sit with and talk with folks who lived on the streets, who frankly I had never interacted with and didn't know how to interact with or listen to. And then I had the opportunity to spend some time in different countries. So not the DR, but on the other side of the Hispaniola. I got a few trips to Haiti, went to the Philippines, went to a few places, but the Philippines was actually the place that I most remember having a deep feeling of jealousy of that community, like it forever. And I was like, this is weird. Like you're saying, they don't have the access to I am wealthy in comparison in every material way. I've got a computer, a vehicle, a house. I got air conditioner, warm water. Like the contrast is almost too much to articulate. But I had never seen joy and community like this, ingenuity like this, resiliency like this. And I became familiar with what I've called like a type of wealth that exposed my own poverty, where I was like, I am destitute in comparison, almost to the point I can't articulate it in the same way of the material possession contrast, right? And it forever changed me. And to this day, I would say most of what I do is because of that experience and trying to recreate that for others, introduce others to that experience, and then also to just get some of the wealth of the poor in my life. Like I want what they have, and maybe I have something they might want too, right? And I imagine that's why you would say, oh, this is the best thing that I do, because of it's not a guarantee, but there's a possibility for this impact in those places that you cannot recreate in a classroom.
Exactly. It's kind of like being a patient in a hospital.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not going to put somebody in the hospital on purpose. Like that's.
I might, but yeah, I got you. Yeah.
Problematic, right? So, but I can take them to a place where they can have an experience that Yeah, it's like you can put them there and go, well, let's see what happens. And more times than not, it's impactful. And I get the opportunity to write recommendation letters for a lot of my students for med school. And in those conversations, in the rec letter, I talk about the trip to the DR, but in their interviews and in their personal statements, they often talk about how that changed them. Like, we have students who will choose a particular med school because it's community health based.
Yep.
They're going to go into a part of medicine that will not make them a lot of money.
Yep.
Like, they're going into debt for med school, and then it's going to be 20 years before they dig themselves out of it, because they're going to sacrifice the slick, opportunity to be a specialist and make a lot of money for the thing that they said they want to do all along, which is to do good in the world and to help people. And so I really love that and appreciate that about this kind of opportunity. And a lot of them go back on their own. They'll go back for a summer-long internship with Dr. Awesome. Or just go back to visit their host family.
Yeah.
I just love these people. I feel like they're my family too.
So good.
And it's a very common refrain. But one of the things I really love about that trip, when it's a December trip, because we've taken it in December and May many times, the December trip ends, students go home, and about the time they wake up, it's Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And, they open up some $200 gift. And the stark contrast between where they've been and where they are, I think really takes hold in that. I mean, it basically wrecks the whole Christmas thing. For them in terms of the material, like getting stuff.
It's a good goal. Like, I'm going to wreck your Christmas. That's what we're doing here.
Sometimes I gotta tell them that.
No, yeah, you hold that back until maybe the flight home. Be like, well, good luck with that. Well, it's interesting. I promise I'm going to circle back to these things, but like, I just piggybacking on that, you reminded me of some interactions I had. I want to say this was in Haiti. We had a group of students with us. So I worked with a dude who's from Haiti, but lives in the United States, that we went together. He was working with a community there and used the model of a fraternity because he liked fraternities, and there was a group of men in this village that he had met, and he's like, I'm going to continue to come back and let's use the template of a fraternity, a brotherhood. And so we were there to work with them, but we piggybacked that with like another trip doing something else at a local orphanage. We just kind of tagged along so we get down there. It was nearby. So we were over here working with this community. They were working this like more student group working in an orphanage. But we got together with them for like meals and things like that. I mean, that was the whole idea, is like, you guys are going and going to have it all set up. We're going to go do this other thing, but like, we can eat here, sleep here, that kind of thing. So we partnered and did that. And I remember there was like this, so people have like kind of a gated in property, there's like closed off, but you can see through it. It's like bars. And they were getting everyone together for lunch, and they brought out all this chicken, and the food there is incredible. And so we start fixing up some plates, and we start realizing that there's some students who are not getting food or not eating. And by the way, there's a bunch of people coming to the gate, like from around the community. Right. And there's students who are like, I can't eat, and see them. And I just thought, this is the greatest. And so one of the, and like, I think I mimicked this at first and then like really owned it. It became, but like, I want to say it was my buddy that said this first, but he said like, you always eat like this, and they are always out here like this. Why do you have a problem today? Eat your lunch. You always eat your lunch. When do you have a problem eating your lunch? Like, now it's a problem all of a sudden because you can see them? Like, as a matter of fact, this is good for you. Eat your lunch and watch. Like, just, they're there. They would love some chicken too. We have chicken for you guys. That's what we got chicken for, right? Like, you always eat your lunch. What's the problem? And And that became a thing that echoed again and again and again. I see you nodding, so just go ahead. I'm like curious about these, because there's these little moments that feel like the whole trip was defined by this moment with this person or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think for different students and different people, those moments get defined at different times
Yeah.
or places, you know, and it can be a big thing that's everybody's kind of focused on like that, or it could just be this side conversation, like where we do a lot of health clinics, and the students work in like intake registration, and there's a nurse who kind of oversees the vital section, so the students are learning to do blood pressure and temperature weigh and people stuff like that, but they meet the patients when they come in. And to meet, you know, when you have a 20-year-old college student who meets a 17-year-old in a bate, which is basically the history of Hispaniola is challenging, and Haitian people were brought to the Dominican to work in the sugarcane plantations. Yep. They were made promises; those promises were not kept, and now they live in those same plantation areas. Most of the sugarcane plantations are no longer operational, but these groups of people who came from Haiti generations ago still live there with no citizenship and no real connection to any country. They still speak Creole, but they also speak Spanish usually, and they have some very difficult living circumstances and harrowing stories to tell. So when a 17-year-old shows up at a health clinic and she has 3 children who are hers, and a 20-year-old takes in this woman with her children, it will rock her world, because she will realize that this is a different place that she does not understand, she knows nothing of, and has no idea how to help. Because I think the thing about I want to help people sort of indicates that you know how.
There, yeah. That's one of the things I wanted to circle back to. Go on. Yeah, it's like help who and how, right?
So if nothing else, it identifies the complexity.
Yeah.
What it means to help somebody else. It means walking into the storm and being okay with, you know, getting whipped around and doing it wrong and saying something that you regret and going back and trying to make it right. But it's always a forward motion. That, okay, well, I did that wrong, but how can I stop and listen and think and take it in? There's a communication theory that I teach in my classes called the culture-centered approach to health communication, and it's Mohan Dutta is the author of this approach. But what he is railing against is this very common process of people in public health, like huge organizations that you've heard of, who go to a place and say, we know what the problem is. Here is this big multi-million-dollar solution to your problem, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it doesn't work is because they didn't listen. And it's not just that it's the wrong solution to the problem, it's that they may not even identify, the people who live there may not even identify that as the problem.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know what the problem is, you certainly don't know how to help. And if your idea of how to address the problem is to solve it with this thing that worked over here, then you probably don't have enough respect for the problem either. Because problems are not just solved, they're addressed. Like if you have marriage problems, you don't just solve it with some intervention. You address the problem and you continue to work on it for the rest of your life and your relationship, because it's that valuable and it's that important. You have to keep moving towards it.
I love that you used marriage as a way to like illustrate that, because, well, I have, I got from my buddy Ian, he is the first person I heard articulate it this way, but it was in reference to me. He was like, I use this phrase, but like, I see this in you, and it really was helpful to me, but like, you married a problem, not meaning my wife, right? But like, although maybe you married a problem, but like, yeah,
No, I
but
mean,
be married to a problem, right? Rather than a solution, rather than a specific tool to say, you know, you enter this storm, you marry this situation, and for the rest of your life, there's this unpacking, this journey, this thing that takes place. And my own experience has been with poor communities that, or even individuals, that it's a surefire way to deepen the experience of poverty, to go to the poor and to not give them the opportunity to voice their own problem or their own hoped for outcome, and to say, here's what you're going to get, here's what's best for you here. It's like to begin by impoverishing, to begin by stripping the voice that they do have, the perspective that they do have, in and to be, like you said, like to be solution oriented in a way that's destructive and hugely problematic to begin with. Where in many cases it would have been better had you not visited.
right. And that is an ongoing concern that I have all the time with taking students to the Dominican, even.
Yeah.
You know, like, are we doing good? Are we making a positive impact? Or are we harming people unawares? And I think it's all of the above.
Yeah. The answer is yes.
There is no person who's perfect. Like, you married a problem, I married a problem, my husband married a problem, your wife married a problem. Like, we marry problems, right? Because people have problems. And so when we show up there, the worst thing we can do is see ourselves as the solution and them as the problem. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely horrifying.
And yet common.
Problem, you know. But we're also people who are beautiful and complex and want to be related and have an opportunity to go and be related to other people. And so we go and we do that and we see what happens and try to realize that it's just not about us. The whole thing is not about us. And one of the things that I do like about going back to the DR, which is killing me right now because we obviously cannot go. Right. You know, I haven't been, it'll be a year next week since the last time I was there. And that's the longest I've gone without going since 2016. So it's really hard to not have that connection with these people who are my friends. But the ongoing relationship at least helps me to know when I have caused harm, I'm more likely to at least be able to see it and to address it than if I just went, dropped things, left, and never went back. Like, it's about the relationship. And that's what I try to get the students to see. This is about the relationship. The reason that Dr. Curl's initiative works is because he's related to these communities. He goes and then he goes back and he walks through these neighborhoods and he knows the people who live in the houses and they know him. And this relatedness is what is going to be the most powerful tool. There is no pharmaceutical that's going to do that. There is no medical device or piece of infrastructure that is going to triumph over a positive relationship that someone has, because through that relationship is an opportunity for care and love and dignity and regard. And that is, I think, more important than the need to like satisfy my own want to make me feel like I helped somebody. Do me a favor and tell me something. So I know that your research is really qualitative, right? And so that's more based on interviewing and kind of survey of the culture and the narrative. And is it called ethnography? Yes. I even autoethnography, so that's super fun. Like self-bio, is that? Yeah. We should. I'd like to get some experience with that. So I'm just in my own shoes in the work of the Well and Well-Built Bikes and all the different things that we've done. I think that everything we've ever done has been about relationships as best we can set the table for that. And
and it's been very clear to me, like, I don't actually, like, here's a meal. It's okay. You're going to get hungry again. This doesn't fix anything. But the time together is what we're after, right? We can build a bike together. We can work in the garden together. But I want to set tables where these people can rub shoulders, much for the same reason that you want to take people to the DR and that you're doing experiential learning projects in town in the diverse community that your college is in. But one of the challenges that, like, I just thought of based on what you were saying, because you're like, well, that's what matters. And it's not all about the like thing that we hope to achieve or whatever. In our work and in probably most nonprofit work, you need to fund the work, and you try to write grants or talk to potential investors or donors. And it's always been a challenge to me because of what seems like the need for quantitative analysis or impact measurement. So like, it's weird because it's like, it's like it would be more meaningful. And I'm going to use this as a caricature because it's like the way I feel about it and don't like this, but it would like be more meaningful to you that I was like, I gave socks to 2,000 people than I built 2 friendships.
Yeah.
But I am more interested in building 2 friendships. Someone else can give them socks. Right. But there's like, so that's just an output. And then you go, well, what's the outcome of having given them socks or having given those relationships? And in relationships, I mean, God, I go, well, how do you measure success? Well, I'm in relationship with him and we've been friends for 10 years. And well, is his life all put back together? It's like, God, no, this dude's a disaster. Like, yeah, like, what are we talking about? And I'm nobody's savior. And I really struggle with that. In general. And I'm just curious, I don't know, because I know the distinction is clear to you. And I don't know if if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, but I'm just curious how that plays out I'm sure in the medical world, it's very similar in terms of grant orientation, what research you're going to, like, even funding qualitative research itself, I imagine being more challenging and data-driven numbers. Like, yeah. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? I'm trying to like really learn something about this.
So, okay. So first of all, there are 100 ways I could talk about this. I love numbers. Like my two best subjects in high school were math and creative writing. I don't know how
that's perfect. That's perfect.
I can't do history to save my life.
See, I
but
like that. Yeah.
math and creative writing, I'm all about it.
Yeah.
So I get the numbers. I just want the story too. So I see that like behind all the charts and graphs, like when I see the charts and graphs, which are a very quick way to represent a lot of,
they're helpful for sure.
Information. They're very helpful.
Yeah.
But behind all of them are stories. You know, and so there's again, with the communication scholarship, there's a communication scholar who wrote this article a long time ago about lists and stories. That people tend to communicate by one or the other. So like hospitals, the medical world, the academic institution communicates via lists because we have to. Like if somebody comes in the ER, you don't have an hour and a half to get their life story. You need to know what their blood type is, how much they've lost, if they're at risk of, you know, all these different things, what medications they're on. You need the list because it's critical for the moment. But what that patient is going to need is the story, because when they go home, they're going to call their family members or their friend or tell who they live with. They're going to tell the story of what happened. And so they're both really important. And we unfortunately live in a world that, at least our world does love stories. We would have Instagram and, you know, podcasts and all.
That's our species. Yeah, right.
We're
built for them.
But when it comes to funding for what we consider like the serious science, people start wanting those lists. And they want measurable outcomes, and they want to know how many people are being impacted by this and what the, you know, what's the benchmark for success here. And so it's very difficult when you love the story to to try to turn that back into like, oh, well, here's the list.
That is the challenge, right? Yep.
Yeah,
It's like,
it really is. And when somebody gives me the list, I feel like it's a lot easier to take that list and go, okay, what's the story here?
mhm.
But you also have to realize that every single list started because people selected which questions they want to ask. And the question is a qualitative measure. People decide questions.
Yep.
And that qualitative move is what drives those lists. Socks. Why socks? We live in Florida, right? I mean, if you live in Minnesota, give people socks. But we live in Florida, give them flip-flops, right? It makes a whole lot more sense. Your feet won't burn in the flip-flops, but they will in the socks. And so somebody asked the wrong question there, And so who's asking the questions? And maybe we could ask some better questions. Not about like, I don't know, how many people came to this food pantry, which people always want to know, but how much fresh produce was handed out to the people from the food pantry, and how many local farmers donated to the food pantry and received some, benefit from that as well. So these kinds of questions we could be asking, but oftentimes are not, because maybe the grant wants us to ask that question, or the local government says it has to be this way, which is why we need people in policy. We need people who are deciding what they're going to fund in the grant process. We need people everywhere, because we need people to know that these questions really matter. My sister's a market researcher, and she writes surveys for a living. When we were little, she used to like give me surveys. It was really annoying because I was the only person she had to survey, and so the results were not very conclusive. But she's always loved this, like analyzing the survey data. But she will tell you that what really matters is the questions you ask on the survey, not just the answers that you get. And if you write a bad survey, you're not going to get good data. And we're always asking the wrong questions, I feel like.
Oh man. Well, I am hoping to figure out how to ask, especially you, the right questions here.
Oh.
Offline from this, I'm like, oh, I definitely want to chat more about this. We are, so in the bike shop, we actually had I'm going to mess this up. Let's say social scientist, researcher that is familiar with, kind of qualitative research, that helped us set up what we're using for our earn a bike program. And we took kind of a double approach. We were like, well, there's only so much that we're going to be able to do qualitatively or quantitatively, where it's like, all right, well, how many earn a bikes did you do? And there's some demographic information, and you can get some indication of how frequently you miss appointments, how, talk to me about some of the challenges that you're facing, what transportation obstacles, how those present themselves and how they affect your health and your access to resources and things like that. But then what we do is, as they come in to do their hours and earn their bike, after they'll do like a 5-hour day with us to kind of put in their volunteer hours, we'll have them journal. And that journal entry is just like, tell us your thoughts, feelings, and opinions about how this went. So it's framed in a way that's like, you could literally write anything. And we say to them, you don't need to be nice. If there's something we can improve, we want to know it. One of the challenges there that I haven't found my way around is literacy. So some people can write really good, and then some I'll be like, it was good. And even that's misspelled, and I'm like, okay, cool. We'll take that. Like, that's good to know it was good. And I've always been like, well, you can sit and do it verbally, but I've also been nervous about like how that'll change the thing. But we do that, and I've been really happy about that, where I'm like, we're doing an okay job with that. And we punch word for word all of those things into a spreadsheet, so we can do like content analysis, where I can go, that's where I learned from the Earn-A-Bikers, so you start, okay, this keeps echoing everywhere, and it's worded differently, but basically there's a theme that emerges. And the way that I would rephrase it out of like 100 statements was, this was meaningful work for which I was well compensated. And that was huge to us, right? For folks that were unemployed or don't have a lot of experience in that. And there was a lot of the things that I most love about what we're doing, I learned from those things and go, oh, double down on that. Like there were some tasks that we had people do that I thought, this is like, it's almost as if we're just making them kill time.
Yeah.
One of them was disassembling these wheels so that we could sort out the metal. And
I worked bike shop warehouse, remember?
Yeah. So you remember disassembling and the situation with some of these wheels. Well, what was interesting is some of the most positive feedback came surprisingly from people. So we've since gone, we don't actually need that done. And so we're having like, it feels weird to have someone do. However, the people that wrote, like, this was meditative. This was so good for me to sit and like have some peace. Mm-hmm. And like the feedback that came out of that task is like, man, we might have people do this task just for their own sake.
Yeah.
If it seems like a good fit temperamentally, personality wise, or whatever, trying to learn those things. But anyway, I feel like, okay, I learned some stuff and I learned the value of doing that and pulled some stuff out. And then I'm like, oh, but I also want to, and I think a lot about this, like the whole asking the right questions. And I remember that being a big part of shaping this thing, like rewording to not lead or to not, and so now I want to go to, and I plan to go to some partner organizations. So if you have ideas or want to work with me on this, I want to write a questionnaire for places that are working with women, maybe not exclusively women, but have some women that are in a situation that might utilize the Earn a Bike program. And then say, when I see you having ideas. That's why I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Because I'm like, when I look at the demographic of who completed the Earn a Bike program, it's largely men. And part of me goes, well, maybe that's just the way it is. Maybe that's the population that needs it. But then I go, man, some of the obstacles are like, well, transportation when I don't have transportation. Like, how did I get there the first time? Do I have kids? Like, and here's the thing is, I guess part of this, the lesson from people like you is, well, you can have some guesses, but you need to ask them, like, do you want the Earn a Bike program? Would it be helpful to you? And what might keep you from getting it, doing it? I'm intimidated by the type of volunteer work because there's wrenches involved. I don't know. I can only guess at this point, but I want to go. So I plan on going to a couple partner organizations and saying, hey, would you help us with this questionnaire with your own folks? And in exchange, maybe I can fast track them in the waiting list a little bit, like give them some preferential treatment in the timeline to go, we want to get your ladies some bikes if they need them and want them, and maybe help overcome some of those obstacles. But I don't have that questionnaire. This is on a to-do list, those partnerships. So it's like, oh, that's on the agenda for this coming season. That's something I want to tackle there. Sounds like you might have some ideas around that. And
I just recently met someone who has a nonprofit organization associated with a for-profit business, but her nonprofit organization provides transportation for women. So I thought you might be interested in meeting her. I
am, yeah.
So you want me to tell you the story of how I met Athena?
Whatever you can share, yeah, do it.
So I had to buy a car. My car was totaled in a hit and run accident, and I needed to replace it, but I needed to replace it in the middle of a pandemic, which was...
This is recently?
Well, it was hit and run in December, and I tried to replace it in July because we were in England for 6 months.
This isn't your van, is it?
No.
Okay, go on. I couldn't breathe. I needed to.
Yeah,
okay, go.
That would not have been a good thing.
Right. Okay.
So my little Prius that I loved and got 44 miles to the gallon, and I was very happy with, never had any trouble with, and kaplooey. No one was hurt. My husband was driving. We were both fine, walked away. Other people had arrests made. There was a gun and a shovel involved, off scene, because they fled the scene, and then somebody followed them, and I don't know. We were just standing on the side of the road by ourselves going, what are we supposed to do now? We just got hit and everybody left, and what do we do?
Yeah. Jeez.
So anyhow, nevertheless, that's a whole other story. But I had to replace this car. So I go around and I start doing the car shopping thing, which is ridiculous.
Don't
Like,
nobody want to do that.
you want to feel like you're being taken advantage of, go try to buy a car, you
Mhm.
know? And it just, you can't, it's like, oh, I don't trust you. Oh, I don't trust you. And you sit down and you think, oh, I can trust you. Oh, no, I can't trust you either. And so it was just very frustrating. And we left this place one day, and I screamed, literally, gutturally, in a parking lot, leaving a car dealership. Like, very demonstrably screamed.
Yep.
Okay. And we got in our van, the nice van that's still intact.
Okay.
And he said, I said, I need to find a car dealership run by women. There was too much testosterone in that conversation.
Mm.
And so he was like, sorry. You know, there had just been a big kerfuffle that blew up, and it was all frustrating. He was frustrated. I was frustrated, but I was really frustrated. So I Googled car dealership run by woman, and I found this place called She Car in Orlando. And I got home, looked him up online, made an online appointment, and within like 30 minutes, I'm talking to this woman named Athena, who now is like my BFF, and she helps me buy a car. I never had to leave my house again. I knew everything about the car. Like, it was this really great opportunity, very, very transparent about everything that was happening, really positive car buying experience. And the best thing about it was that when I bought this car, which ended up costing me less and a whole lot less stress and less exposure to the virus, which I was really concerned about, because of this, you know, child that I have had for 18 years is immunosuppressed, and I can't afford exposure for him.
Yeah.
What was really great is that she also has a nonprofit organization that all the car sales go to support. You know, a portion of it goes to support this business she has called, or a nonprofit she has called She Cares. And She Cares provides transportation for women in need. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think you should meet Athena.
I love it. Yeah.
She has access to, you know, a portal towards, you know, women who need transportation in Orlando. At least that's where she's based.
Yeah.
But because she's online, like, she can operate anywhere in the country.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So
so
definitely we'll circle back to that for sure and get some contact info. So let me see here. Okay. So I know you said you'd listened to a couple episodes of this before.
Mhm.
I wanted to, and I may have already told you about the book. Probably I have, because I try to tell everybody, but so it's been a minute since I've uploaded an episode. But the last episode was with Jerome Miller.
Mhm.
And and actually I want to say that was the second one with him, and just an episode or two before that was the first one. Jerome wrote a book that, to me, I think is the most important book that I've ever read. And I know just from talking with you, you will love this book and utilize this book. It's called The Way of Suffering.
Mhm.
And it is, and I think actually he calls the field of, because he's retired now. He was a philosophy professor. And it's like this philosophical, psychological read of the landscape of suffering and grief and pain, and, you know, all those things we want to avoid in our lives. And he's like, and yet you find yourself there. Perhaps you might do well to have some knowledge of the terrain or whatever. And he wrote this book, and it actually, you've reminded me of it multiple times. So for those that are listening, you should listen to those episodes. This dude is phenomenally intelligent. I highly recommend that book in particular. Some of his other books are great as well. But this book in particular was like, for me, is like, so I ended up connecting with him because I just emailed him at the end of it. When I finished the book, I was like, thank you so much for writing this book, which I've never done to an author, but I was like, this one's too important. I reached out. We've stayed in touch over the years, kind of just occasional emails, but I recently asked him to come on the podcast. We were able to do that, which was awesome. But I think he even calls like his field of study like traumatology, which I love. And there's I hear some familiarity, I guess. I mean, even I know recently you were able to, was the setup for your talk that you gave recently like this is the talk I would give if I knew I didn't have much time left or something like that?
Yeah, the last lecture.
The last lecture. So
Yeah.
I will confess I did not get to finish it, but it is queued up. And by the way, for those listening, like it's on YouTube. You should look it up. It's phenomenal. But even the title on it is like Good Grief. And you did like this kind of like, what was it? Like stay on the sunny side of life, but like in parenthetical was like stay on the sunny side of
the end of life.
The end of life. And even as you were talking before, you're like, there's always a bright side. There's always something to learn. There's always something positive in this. And you said something in that talk that I was like, okay, this is just too good. So your last name is Grief?
Yeah. Isn't that fun?
It is. Well, and it's really interesting because like and even as you were talking about like building your life and the things that you control and the tension with the things outside of your control. When I talked to Jerome Miller, it's actually the first chapter of his book. I want to say it's called like Ordinary, The Closed Home, I think is what the opening chapter is called. I could be wrong about that, but work, like literally the topic of work is the way that he talks about the way we approach life as a project, as something we're building, and in his mind as an effort to control and secure us against vulnerability. And so he does this so it's funny because when I first read it, I just ate it up. But since I've been doing the work ethic and reflecting on work as like a real gift, I was like, oh, I don't like your first chapter anymore. Like the way you're using work, I don't. And he's like, yeah, we mean something different. And it's funny. It made perfect sense to me. He's like, yeah, no, the work you're talking about is work that you have to die before you can do. Meaning you have to go through something. You have to have faced these things. And you said, well, nothing had happened to me at that point in my life. And many of these students haven't dealt with anything at this point in their life. And having not listened to your whole talk, I know you've got something like the good news of grief, and you've got a lot of your research that has taken place in end of life. And I'm super fascinated around the role that people's spirituality and religion plays in understanding and making decisions within that space. So I wanted to kind of steer us into this, like, I know a class of yours is called Ethics in the End of Life, right? And I want to hear a little bit about good grief. I want to hear a little bit about like why that might be something I might value.
So I'll tell you a story.
Good.
I'm not a quantitative scholar.
Good.
One of the interviews that I conducted when I was working on my dissertation was with a mother whose child was 3 or 4 years old and was in hospice because the child had late stage cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so close to the end that I was somewhat concerned that the child could die while I was conducting the interview.
Mm-hmm.
So very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I felt heavy when I walked in that room, and the nurses were concerned that the mother was going to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we were in the room. The child was very young, and we were just talking, and the child was asleep, you know, in the bed. And this was a woman who had no high school education. She was, by all accounts, learning impaired. So she had a learning disability of some kind. I don't think she could read. But she was very much, I mean, she was not smart. Mm-hmm. She just was not academic. She did not have any academic prowess. Mm-hmm. And here I am, a Ph.D. student, you know, conducting research for the academic world. Mm-hmm. And I'm face to face with a woman who will never have any great strides in academia, for sure.
Right.
And she was the wisest participant that I had in my research, group. And the reason I say she was so wise is because she was facing the greatest calamity that I could really think of, having to sit and watch and wait, knowing that your child was about to die.
Mm-hmm.
It is a terrible, terrible place to be. Yet she just exuded peace and calm and tranquility and love and care for me, care for the nurses who came in the room, and not like because she was not willing to admit what was going on, but because she had what I would describe as the peace that passes understanding, like a completely illogical, nonsensical peace about her. And what she had done is she had just made very little of herself. She was not self-centered in any way. She wasn't bemoaning her situation. She wasn't wallowing in self-pity, though I'm sure there were moments when she was, desperate and concerned and grief-stricken in ways that would have been more maybe sensical to the rest of us. But what she did have was this deep, like, kind of trust that she was not the person in control, and she trusted, we were talking about spirituality, and she just trusted that everything was out of her control, but she trusted the one who was in control, or who she perceived to be in control. And because of that, she could live with what was happening. She was sad. She was appropriately sad, but she was not hard to be around at all. And it was captivating. It's captivating to be a part of that conversation. And I just learned that anyone can exist in peace in any circumstance, if they had the ability to see things through whatever lens she was looking through.
Yeah. Man, it's so good. Well, it really highlights this thing that I think about a lot, and I forget where I first encountered this, but like it basically just broke out this idea of like we have a condition. We can have a condition. I could be thirsty, that's a condition, and I could take a drink and it does something about my condition. You have circumstances, like you said when you were in the hospital, like I can't allow these circumstances to change what I know to be true in the bigger picture outside of these circumstances. And then what you just said was like anyone can have this, what is really a state of being, this like peace that passes understanding in any circumstance and in any condition because of something that transcends circumstance and condition. Yeah. And I'm curious, like, that's been a helpful template for me, because it often, like when we talk about like working with the poor, like, well, are we talking about a condition or circumstance? And like, by the way, this whole state of being question, maybe they have something to really help us with, right? People who are well acquainted with suffering, can teach us a substantial amount. And then how does that inform? So you're doing research, you take these stories, right? You go, wow, that's a reality. Now, how does this inform? Well, what do you do with this then? Yeah,
I think maybe the first thing I do in that moment is, I would walk away from some of these interviews like, whoa, because I have to take it into my own life first.
Forever impacted, right?
Yeah, this has to do something to me if I have any hope of being able to take it to other people. So I see myself as like this conduit, right? Mm-hmm. I get something, and then I should be able to pass it through to other people. And so I'm like, what is this in me so that I can then pass it through to other people? And it may be something different, right now than it was when it happened a few years ago, when I actually had that conversation. But I think that the first thing that washed over me is like that I am so arrogant. Like and it is like my kind of banner thing that I wave all the time, like, oh, you're so like, I am arrogant. I think too much of myself. I think that being smart will solve problems, and that I'm going to be able to conquer something by, as a student getting an A, or as a professor doing, having all my students be successful, whatever that means. Like, there's just this arrogance that can consume you in academia. And if you're good at something and you do that thing and get the high marks for it, then it's easy to believe that that's the only thing that really matters. Like, if you're a great musician, music is the thing that really matters. If you're a great scholar, academia is the only thing that really matters. If you're a great surgeon, the best surgery, the most successful surgery is the thing that really matters. But that's not true. Like, we make up those rules ourselves so we can measure other people by them, and we come out on top. You look so good because you measure yourself according to other people. Well, try to measure yourself against something that's a much higher standard and see how you measure up. And this is what this woman was living every single day. She was measuring her life and everybody else's life against this perfect standard, knowing that we all kind of exist in this imperfect playing field, and going, well, we're going to exist here together in this kind of brotherly love, sisterly love. And we can do that because we're all imperfect. And I thought that was a really lovely reminder. So that was the first thing that I walked away from it with. But yeah, I think it can be something new every time. Like, so I'm reminded of that interview and telling you about it here now. You asked me another question, I might be reminded of something else that happened. And my students, my class is kind of like this. So, my poor students, they're always at my, oh, and now there's this story. Oh, and I had this thought, and oh, here's this. And hopefully they'll cobble it together and make a story for themselves that's going to help them to navigate the, whatever world they go into, whether they become a doctor or a, entrepreneur, or if they decide to, forget college and I'm going to go, drive a street sweeper because I just need the solitude. Like, whatever they do, hopefully what happens in that room, they'll be able to take that block, put it on their building site, and do something positive with it.
So good. Well, there's a question I ask most every guest that I've had on, and I try to remember, and I basically almost forgot every question I normally ask everyone, because I'm just loving this conversation. But you said, success, whatever that means. How do you define success?
Oh gosh, I hate this question. So in my high school, I was most likely to succeed.
Obviously.
That is a stamp you should not put on, a kid. Like, that's just not nice. Because if you're already an overachiever and then you have a bunch of people going, well, you're most likely to succeed, let's watch and see what happens. It's a lot of pressure. Not really. It's mostly pressure. I mean, I wanted that title.
You still got your eyes on that valedictorian that was in first place. You're still watching, like, well, what are they doing today? Like, let me check out that Facebook, see what she's got going on.
He's the engineer. Like, so and there were actually two valedictorians, and then I was salutatorian because they both had a 4.0, and I made B's in biology. So he's the Duke Law grad, and she's the civil engineer who does all this great stuff. So anyhow, yeah, I wanted that though. Like, I always wanted the accolades. I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be this and that, and as I gotten older, like, what success, I was the editor of the high school newspaper, and I wrote a column every month when the newspaper came out, and the column that I wrote after the senior superlatives came out was called "What is Success?"
Do you have that?
Probably somewhere.
Send that to me. Find that and send that to me.
That's a trip to the attic, John. I'm not sure if I can do it, but if I find it, I'll let you have it.
All right, and then I'll read it on a follow-up podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Stay tuned.
That's probably what I wrote. But I did know that I questioned, like, what does this even mean? Even then I knew, like, does it mean you're successful if you graduate from college, if you get, like, I've got a PhD now, I have a job, like, does this measure my success? But I mean, I don't know. I mean, success is different for every person, I would say. That's a very American thing to say. Oh, well, it's very individualized, our individualized success. But I think we could think about, there are plenty of ways you could frame it. If you think about community success, what does it look like, not just for an individual person to be successful, but for your community to be successful? And maybe if my neighbor was living in a way that was, whole and edifying and healthy and good, that could be considered success because we're so bound together because we live in community, that their success is my success. I think that is a much more, I don't know, that feels a lot better than personal success, because I really get tired of the, I'll take mine and you take yours and we'll, fight it out in the end.
Sure.
I got nothing for that anymore.
Yep.
It's too hard.
So you mentioned before that, so mom and dad both had advanced degrees. Did you say that? And dad was a coach for the Reds. Did you say that?
He's a scout he was a scout for the Reds. He just his position was eliminated, COVID.
Sure.
So, but he was a part-time scout. He owned a business, he owned a sporting goods store for a while. He's taught in a community college. He actually taught in a prison, a federal prison.
Nice.
Maximum security. Yeah. He's done a lot of different things. My dad's an entrepreneur. Right now he teaches hitting lessons, like baseball hitting lessons.
Baseball,
so
yeah.
He teaches kids how to hit and then helps them try to, get into a good college where they can play baseball and earn a degree and all. So, but my mom's a middle school teacher, she's retired now, but she was a middle school teacher. And that's a special thing to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So, she had, a master's in education, and then she got a special, extra certification in special ed. But she did not profit off of these advanced degrees. And my dad got an MBA, which allowed him to teach, at the college level, but again, did not profit off their degrees. It was like, education is an endeavor for your own edification, not for, not for financial success. And my husband and I have pretty much followed that.
Yeah, theme. It looks like it's stuck. Well, I'm curious about something. Well, okay. In that talk on YouTube, you show this photo of you very young with your mean-mugging sister.
That's a good one.
It's good. And I try to ask folks, and I realize, it's probably around then. Like, what are your earliest memories of work? Or to put it another way, like when work as a word took on meaning in your life, like what was it? How do you just go as far back as you can remember?
So I remember that every Saturday we would have to clean the house. And that I would go and suddenly have to use the bathroom. And I would spend 20 minutes, as long as I could possibly get away with, in the bathroom, to try to get my sister to do more of the work than I would come out and help her finish it. Because I just wanted to avoid housework. I hated housework. And if you had a wider view of my office, you would already see how messy it's becoming. I've only been in this particular office for a couple months, but it's getting there. I just don't like to clean up, right? That kind of work I don't like. And so I kind of thought of myself as someone who is lazy and doesn't like to work because I didn't like to clean up and I didn't like to do housework. And that was the main work that I had to do. School was easy, so I could do my schoolwork. It didn't really challenge me that much and I could get it done. But I remember one time I was at softball practice and I got in the car to go home, and my mom said, you know, all the other moms were talking about their daughters fretting over this big paper that you all have to do. And I was like, what? She said, have you been working on this? And I just didn't know about it. And I just burst into tears. It's like, no, I haven't done anything on it. It was like due in 2 days or something. And I hadn't done any work on it because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to like actually work hard and be successful in school. I just knew how to get by and be like, I mean, I still got good grades because I could just do it, and it didn't really require anything of me. So that was kind of my great awakening, that sometimes school required work too. And I guess I had to grow into that. I remember in college, I remember being terrified to go to college because everything in school had been relatively easy for me up to that point. And I knew that I knew people who spent one semester at college and then had to tuck tail and turn and go home. And I did not want that to be me. And I was really afraid that was going to be me. Thankfully, it stuck, obviously. I learned how to read a syllabus and to do the thing you're supposed to do and to get the good grade at the end and to pat myself on the back.
Always a forward motion.
What?
You said always a forward motion earlier.
Always forward motion.
That's it.
But I don't even remember where I was going with this. What was the original
question?
Well,
work, like memories of work, shaping of work. Yep.
Then I remember being on one of those like spring break trips in college where you go and do service. We were in a Native American community roofing a house. So, you picture like 18-year-old me, probably like 5'2", 105 pounds or something, up on top of a roof with a shovel trying to, get shingles off of a house. And it was the, kind of traditional definition of what work is, and feeling like I could do work like this. Like there was some kind of power in it. And I just remember thinking, work hard, this is good. And you could see the production of what happened like over the course of a number of days. You actually see the physical work that you do. And there's something really gratifying about that. And as a student, you don't always see what you've done. And so physical work that you can see was really, really great. But then I remember going on another trip many years later where the work that we were doing was more in line with what I was like learning in school. And I was teaching something that I really felt like I had a skill at. Not like roofing a house where somebody had to show me literally every single thing to do. It's something I felt equipped to do. And I thought, oh, this is even more meaningful. Like I actually have something to bring here and to work with people on, and to, to be that conduit, like of passing through something I had gotten. I've been blessed with this. Let me bless you with that. See where that goes from there. And that was really, so like all these different instances, but in every single one of them, it was, how am I going to relate to the people around me and do this thing that I've been called to? Like, how is this going to impact somebody else? When I was a kid, not wanting to clean the house, it was like, how much can I get my sister to do, right? And if she ever watches this, she'll be like, yes. But then for like working on a roof of a house with a bunch of other people, it was like, I want to do my part. Like, I want to hold my own here and work with my, friends. And then when I'm, teaching and have an opportunity to teach something that I've gotten to learn about, it was great to be able to relate this to other people in a way that was, hopefully edifying to them. And so these are all kind of different ideas of work, but they all have something to do with how you relate to the people around you.
I love this. I almost feel like I want to like pull out a template, and maybe you already have one in mind, but like you're like defining this work in relationship. Like, okay, I'm going to get her to do it. I'm going to do my part, kind of be part of a team and carry my weight. And then relaying these things to others. And I want to add one that I'm sure you're familiar with and maybe want to speak to. If this was like a template we laid out, the other one I would say is and maybe you've seen this on trips you've taken, or the people you were on that roof with, or the people that you researched alongside, but like the thing that happens between shoulder to shoulder work, I think is a powerful dynamic, and actually I would argue is the best table that can be set. So we set a table and we eat together. That's like the archetype of, you know, breaking bread and building relationships, and even in history has major significance. But for me, experientially, I'm like, yeah, but if we dig a ditch together, or we build this bike together, or we rip this roof off together, or we research this topic together, something happens. And I see you nodding emphatically. So tell me about that, because I feel like that goes with all that you're saying here.
So, I mean, I can think of many instances in which that has happened, like this resonance that you get with this group of people towards a common goal. I'm trying to think of the 700 things that are popping off in my mind right now. I want to kind of go in this moment, but like, so my colleagues that I work with here in Honors College, the faculty and the advisors and our dean and like, I really like doing what we do with these people, because we have these common goals. And right now it's killing us because we don't get to see each other. Like, I walk out this door, there's nobody out there. People are having to work from home, and we're all sort of like separated, and we're kind of bemoaning that because we actually like to be together. And I think that gets lost in I'm going to get my dream job. Well, your dream job will be defined by the people you work with much more than what your job description is. Because if you work with people that drive you nuts and that you have a really bad fractured relationship with, it won't matter how much money they give you to do it. It won't be enough, and you won't be fulfilled. But if you work with people that you enjoy being around, and that you feel like some resonance with, like you're doing good work in the world. And I don't care if that's picking up the trash on the side of the road, or if it's teaching students, or if it is, organizing a storefront. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have this kind of camaraderie, teamwork feel. That feels like good and productive work that you like. There's something, it's like the fourth dimension about that. Like, you can't see it or smell it or touch it, but you can, now I'm going to the senses instead of dimensions, whatever,
I got you.
But there's something there beyond what can really be described. It's a sensibility. And I felt that like in working with groups, like leading a camp, like a bunch of adults scrapping it out with a bunch of students, where you're like, oh my goodness, and you get this camaraderie. Or with my faculty here, or with my students when we go to the Dominican. I mean, there is a relatedness with these people because you've had this common shared experience. But what I want to get to with this is why I really, really believe in interdisciplinary teams. We have huge problems in the world. We do a grand challenge competition in honors. And what I tell the students every time is, if we're going to address the big problems in the world, we're not going to do it as individuals, and we're not going to do it from a single disciplinary lens. Like, engineers are not going to solve the world's problems. Doctors are not going to solve the world's problems. Teachers are not going to solve the world's problems. But if you put a doctor, a teacher, and an engineer in a room together, and they begin to look at what is going on, to talk to people, to understand the problem, those different lenses and perspectives will begin to make something richer, and they will appreciate the perspective of another person. If you line up 5 engineers, they'll be competing for who's the best. But if you put an engineer, a doctor, and a teacher in the room, the engineer can appreciate what the doctor knows because they don't know that. And the doctor can appreciate what the teacher knows because they don't know that. And the teacher can, it just goes to this like rich, related relationship for working together that I think is much more fruitful than the siloed approach that we often get. And academia is the worst offender of this. Like, we have to silo out every little category of education. You're this kind of major, so you take these kinds of classes, and we might pepper it in with a few things so you're not, completely just in one direction. But we're not really focused on bringing together different disciplines, which is why I like the Honors College, because this is what we do. We're interdisciplinary. We're bringing all these people together.
Yeah, there's so much about what you do that just resonates so deeply, where I'm like, in so many ways, I'm like, we're like in the same vocation, or have a very similar calling that looks very different. But I just hear, as you talk about like your heart for what you're doing, just really resonates with me. And I love that you use the word resonance in these bringing people together. And incidentally, it is a technology. Even it's a there's tribes that will send all of the young men out into the wilderness for a time together to suffer an ordeal together, sometimes even with some hallucinogens together, like go see demons together, because and very similar we see in soldiers when they come back from war. Like there's something like bonds or brotherhood.
Team.
Yes,
And,
yes.
People who play music together, literal resonance with each other. Like you have to make this thing together as one. I think the symphony or the band is a really great image of what's going on.
That's good.
Everybody has their part, but when you put it all together, it makes something really beautiful and captivating, even to other people, and good for others. And I think we understand that. I mean, kids get that in school.
Yeah.
And I think when we leave school, it can be a rude awakening that as adults, we don't have many of these opportunities for these resonant kinds of, gatherings anymore. Like you're not supposed to play sports after you get out of high school or college. Like some adults do, and I think that's great, but most of us don't get those kinds of opportunities. You don't take dance classes anymore and have a recital. You don't play in the band anymore because there's no band to be played in. Now you have to go to work and do these things, and you don't have this opportunity to work collectively with a group of people to make something or accomplish something that is, bigger than yourself.
Man, it's a powerful idea, and maybe even something I want to like explore further in this podcast is just this idea of the effects of communal work. And you saying, yeah, you know what you want to do, but the bigger question, and a question that is equally important, is who you will do it with, or who you will work alongside. And now I just love the way it surprised me, and it makes sense because you're such a highly relational person, that here's how I understand work. Here's what it was. Here's a few stories about it as it took on meaning in my life. But ultimately it's all related. It's all relational to the rest of the world and to other people, and how you see yourself kind of in the world. I wanted to check in real quick, because I know we're coming up on the time that we said we'd jump off. Are you good for a few minutes, or you got to bounce? You're good. Well, good. Cause I'm like,
my email when this is done. So you keep me on here as long as you want.
Okay. Well, I don't have forever either, but, and honestly, I'm like, I feel like you and I could do like a freaking daily show. I'm like, I could do this regularly with you and would probably benefit from it. So I wanted to ask you something that jumped into my head when I was looking at your classes, and it's the end of life ethics class. I'm a big fan of ethics and philosophy in general. And then specifically around the end of life, I have a lot of thoughts, many of which are just related to a philosophical perspective. Right. But I want to tell you, a brief version of, so my dad passed a few years back, and he ended up with leukemia. And so he ended up in Moffitt. And then after like a long battle with that, which even the long battle with that was kind of a gift, right? Because it wasn't immediate. We didn't lose him. I had time to like process all this stuff with him. It was a real gift. Hard on the family, but we're grateful for the time we had, where it's like, oh, this is coming. We can plan and prepare, and he can, we can wrap some stuff up. But in the last days, and he had, I could just like it, beyond the leukemia, he had, and it related to leukemia because his body couldn't heal itself. So he had some other, this is actually what probably ended up killing him is actually I mean, ultimately it's leukemia, right? But it's always something else.
Yeah.
And what threw him into leukemia and related to, maybe doctors aren't always helping, was a doctor that tried to do a surgery on a very small, unrelated he didn't have leukemia, but he did have like what, I forget the acronym, but it's like the predecessor to leukemia. And he'd had that for 10 years, right? They're like, it's manageable. It's no big deal. I don't remember the letters. But he had a problem and they just were like, oh, we're going to do this little surgery. No big deal. And he could never recover from it physically. Like his body wouldn't heal. That leads to infections, immune systems crashing. Now it's leukemia. And it just started this drop off. And the timeline is like, you shouldn't have had that surgery. Like that surgery led to this for sure.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the family's like, look, things happen, but we're going to send that doctor at least a letter going, heads up, if someone has this condition, you might want to like rethink the like cutting into them kind of thing or whatever. So anyway, all that to get to this last few days of my dad's life, he's got pretty substantial wounds that are, I mean, hard for me to even think about. That they looked like you had been like a shotgun wound. It was like open. And he had dealt with this pain of those wounds throughout this whole process. And then I have leukemia, right?
Right.
And eventually he goes, he does like home hospice, and he comes home and we do some stuff in the house. But then we go to hospice, you know, it's like, it's time, let's take him in. It's the last few days. And my mom, same as when I was in my poor mom, but when I was in my car accident, she never left my side. And she was right there with my dad through all of this, like never left his side. Right. And, it was just, it wasn't immediate when he went into hospice, and she had never left his side, but when he had gone back, now that was like the little window she got to sleep at home.
Yeah.
When he was at home, but it was only a few days. Now he's back in, and she was just, I mean, it's like, look, lady, you just need to get a night's sleep. Right. Mm-hmm. So I basically said, I'm going to stay with dad tonight. Bounce, like go home, try to sleep, do whatever you need to do to get to sleep. Like you really need some sleep, and you're going to need it here soon. Right. So she goes home. So I stayed with him that night, and it's some little so my dad had the TV blaring, even though he's completely knocked out. It's got like around the clock, like news on. And if I changed it, or it's like he would come out of like a morphine induced coma to be like, boy, I was watching that, and then like go back to sleep or whatever. I was like, what the heck? So I had to leave that on. And then he's there like struggling. And I mean, they got him on a ton of painkillers, and he's not really there totally, other than to get up and snap at me a few times about the TV. So it's like, okay, I can't change the TV. So I'm basically just sitting there. And, I struggled the whole night with what I believe was ethics. So I felt that this was wrong. That it was wrong. Like cause I was like, I wouldn't let a dog lay and die like this. And no one would question like ending that pain or that it's like, this is inevitable. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
And I know, like, man, if I saw like an animal that was mortally wounded, like what would I do? This is my father, and I'm alone in this room. And I also know the legal repercussions of seeing through what I believe to be right, like in some deep way. And it was existential. It wasn't like I've thought about this a lot, but I was like looking at him going, this shouldn't go on. Like, what are we waiting for? And getting kind of upset and angry. And I stayed awake the whole night, just thinking, like sitting there staring at him and thinking, like, what do I do in this scenario? and I feel I'm not free to do what I think is right, and I may not be right about that, but I can't shake this feeling that to just sit here feels like, I mean, for lack of a better word, feels like sin. Like this just feels wrong. And so it's that whole scene came flooding into my head just reading the title of your class. I'm curious if it's even related to what your class is about. But I was like, oh, if you have a few more minutes, I was like, I want to hear about that class, but I also just wanted to share that story with you.
Yeah. So a lot of my students are interested in the topic specifically of physician-assisted suicide or physician-assisted death, which would is legal in some states. About 7 states have physician-assisted
Really?
death. Yeah, where people can, with a prescription from their doctor and like multiple like checks in place.
It's terminal, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it has to be terminal. They have to be analyzed by a psychologist. They have to. Like there have to be several things that happen, but ultimately they can get a prescription for a lethal dose of a medication that they would drink and that would end their life of their own will and volition, like not something that would have to involve anybody else doing something to them. And there are huge, as you can imagine, ethical issues with this, but one of them is that access to healthcare is unequal in our country, and some people may be more likely to choose that as a self-sacrifice for their family and financial situation than they would be to continue on because they don't have access to good healthcare.
Makes sense.
And that that access to palliative care and hospice care in particular is helpful in alleviating the pain and suffering of
they had good drugs. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
So while that is definitely hard to watch for sure, hopefully for your dad, that experience, the pain at least was not, as severe as it was. And I often say this about even just like a family dynamic or life of when they're suffering. Sometimes it is worse from the outside looking in than it is to actually live through that.
Yep.
Because there are things at work and at play in a family or in the midst of a situation that people on the outside can't perceive. Kind of like that peace that passes understanding, that the relatedness, the resonance between people working together, all of that can exist without really being able to see that from the outside looking in. But at the same time, death is ugly and hard and sad, and I believe we were made for life. And death is something that we should not treasure and prize, but it is a 100% reality for every person that gets born.
It's part of it. It's part of the package.
It's part of it, and the fact that we're unwilling to talk about it, acknowledge it, plan for it, accept it, these are all problems, and they're more problematic because of our advancements in healthcare. So, years ago, your dad would have never had that surgery, which was ultimately the cause of so much pain for him.
Right.
Because the technology wouldn't have been there for him to have the surgery. He wouldn't have had the surgery. He still would have died from something. He would have had leukemia, but it would have been a different path. It would have been a different way. But sometimes the medical interventions that help us to recover from things help other people to live in a liminal state where they're not really going to recover from that, and it stretches out the time that they're alive. And then ultimately, a lot of times, particularly for children, so babies who are born very early, and of course you go to extreme measures to save these children, which I've had a child in this exact circumstance. The first words that I remember the doctor saying to me after Will was born was, he kept saying, if he succumbs, this is what's going to happen, if he succumbs. And so he was literally like, it was touch and go. They didn't know if he was going to live through the night, his first day of life. And so, but what happens is, the children get put on ventilators. And adults get put on ventilators. You're in a car wreck, you get put on a ventilator. A ventilator is a great thing. It's kept a lot of people alive in COVID, and we've made a lot more of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the more of them we have, the more of them we will use. But when a patient is dying because they're dying and you put them on a ventilator to keep them alive, the way off of the ventilator is for someone to sign a document as a surrogate decision maker to take them off that ventilator. And to me, that is an act of violence to the person who has to hold the pen and sign their name. Because what you're saying is you're literally signing a legal document that says, I'm good with you, doing something that will result in my loved one's death.
Right.
We didn't used to have to sign documents like that. People just died. Yeah. They died of pneumonia. They died of heart attacks. And it was sad and it was terrible and it was awful. But when those same people in those same circumstances still die, but instead of letting them go, we, pump them up with, with drugs and put them on machines and try to keep them going for as long as possible. And then we have to sign a form to pull all that stuff out of them. That doesn't acknowledge that life has an end to it. Throwing a kitchen sink at someone who's 90 years old is cruel.
Yeah.
It's cruel. And so there's so many ways that life ends for people. It would be nice if we could talk about it and have a plan for what we want. Like, what would you want? Do you want the TV blaring the news, in your last days? Does that bring you some level of comfort, even if it drives your son crazy? Okay, well, so be it. We're going to turn the TV on and CNN it up, whatever it is that you love, let's have at it. Do you want to eat, some food that's the doctor says you're not supposed to have because it's bad for your cholesterol?
Yes.
Go for it.
Yes.
Let's have a party. What is it that you want that brings you comfort? And let's talk about that, because there's some great documentaries online, like on Netflix. There's a documentary called Extremists. 22 minutes. Best 22 minutes you can spend if you want to understand the complexity of end of life in hospital care.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's just conversations with families and an intensivist / palliative care physician who is trying to help families navigate these difficult decisions because their loved ones have been put on machines. And they make different decisions for different reasons, but listening to them talk about why they're going to do what they're going to do is really enlightening to the conundrum that people find themselves in medical care. So, yeah, I could talk about, I teach a whole class on this, so of course I've got a lot of material. I can send you books too.
Yeah, well, that was really helpful. And honestly, at some level, as just on the philosophical, psychological side of things, I just, like you're saying, death is something we want to avoid and not face. And much of what is wrong in us comes from something like avoiding the realities of death. I think of like Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death and terror management theory that emerged out of that. And there's a lot of very clear ways that like our efforts to overcome death as an individual or as a population lead to some of our worst behaviors and hardest things that we can do. To kind of, because I do need to run here soon. I probably would want to do this again. Definitely would. I want to talk to you a lot more. And there's so many things like you said that I'm like, man, I want to go back to so many of them. But I'm curious if you have thoughts just like on what we were just saying. So the idea of mortality and then the topic of work. So here, I have no idea who this person was. I heard an interview once. It was a person that worked in, which I can't say this, is it palliative care?
Yeah.
Palliative care.
Yeah.
And he referred to life. Well, he used the image of a bottle of wine. And he's like, a bottle of wine is a really great thing for me. He's like, the guy was like, I love wine. But one of the things I love about wine is you finish it. He's like, so there's like this bottle that is like hundreds of years old that's been cellar kept, that is worth thousands of dollars, that at some level people want to act like now it should be in a museum because it's not wine anymore. It's like this treasure. He's like, but it's wine. And actually it's going to be probably great wine if it was stored properly, and it's meant to be drank.
Yeah.
And then when you finish it, it's gone. It was and he elaborated on that illustration, which has always stuck with me. And then just to piggyback, just because it triggered another memory. So G.K. Chesterton, a favorite writer of mine, writing on courage, was saying that, like, he's basically like, we can't stay alive by running for death. He was actually referring to Jesus saying, he who seeks to save his life will lose it, but who loses his life will save it. And he's like, this is not mysticism, it's practical. He's like, if you're in a fight, if you're in war and you want to get out of it, you can't hide. So you have to cut your way through. So you have to risk your life to save it. He's like, if you're mountain climbing, you have to jump across the precipice to get out of this alive. He's like, so you have to throw your life away. You have to, like, be willing to die to live. And that was this thing that's always stuck with me. And so the line that ties these together with the image of wine. So G.K. Chesterton says, so we desire life like water and we drink death like wine. And I love that line. And then it reminded me of this image of that. But as we, like, reflect on mortality and these beautiful things that come to an end, and even something crafted like wine, I guess I would be interested to hear you maybe speak to just how do you see our relationship with death and mortality, like, in relationship to work, to what we're giving our lives to what we're spending our time on. Like, you live a certain amount of time and you spend yourself doing hard things.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna die, right? Like, talk to me about, the idea of, like, mortality and vocation, I guess, if that's a clear enough way to frame it.
So I was thinking about, when you were talking, I was thinking about the idea of safety. So one of the problems that I have with medicine is that safety is the number one priority. And if you're in a drug trial, maybe that is, important. Obviously, I don't want to disregard safety altogether when you're talking about medicine and patients and cutting on them and whatnot. But for someone who's coming to the end of their life, safety means not doing a lot of things, not eating that food, not going these places, not leaving unattended, not climbing up on that thing to get that, off the top shelf. There's a lot of safety that hems people in and keeps them from being able to do the thing that they want to do.
Yep.
And people aren't nearly as concerned for their own safety as they are for life itself and living in a way that is relational and fruitful. Like, if you talk to older people about what's most important for them, they will usually say something about, like, their family or their friends or their relationships.
Yep.
If you talk to someone who is my age, your age, college student, what's most important to them is their work, maybe their, the thing that they're about right now, because it's all production centered. The thing that they're making is really important. So it shifts over time. So what we're working on, a lot of it depends on where we view the end. Older people begin to grapple with the final days of life, whether it's overtly acknowledged or not. And it's unpopular to acknowledge this. But they begin to grapple with seeing the end and looking back over what they have made or what they have produced by our standards over time, but that, finishing strong has been always important to me. I put that on I think it's in my last lecture thing. I had that written on the chalkboard. I had an old school chalkboard in my office when I was a Ph.D. student, and I wrote in giant letters, "Finish strong." because this is something my dad used to say in a baseball game to his pitchers, finish strong. Like this game, and this is another reason I love baseball. This game is not over until the final out in the final inning, because until then anything can happen. So you want to see it all the way through to the end. And what you want is not, the longest game in the book, but you want the game that ends well. And that's what we remember too, is the end.
Yeah.
You remember the final moments of the tight basketball game.
Yep.
You remember the walk-off homer. You remember how something ends. And we don't think about life that way until it's too late. When life ends tragically and horribly because you had to sign a form and pull somebody off a machine, it paints everything that worked backwards. But if life ends in a way that is kind of that makes sense, at least for the person and who they were, and offers some level of dignity to them, then it's a lot easier to be able to tell that story going forward for the family and the friends of that person. But if someone dies tragically or horribly or painfully, it's just harder to make sense of, and it taints the work of their life, whatever that was, in some particular way. I don't know if that really answers the question or not, but I do think that the way we finish most everything else, we finish the bottle of wine, we finish a meal with dessert, if it's a good one, you see the fork, you're like, there's a dessert here, this is good. So like, that's important. Even like finishing school, we have a graduation ceremony. Like, we think about the ends of all kinds of things, but we don't want to think about the end of life. And I think it's just because we don't know what comes next. So that it's a fear, and so we just avoid it. But we don't know what comes next after graduation either.
Sure.
Yeah. That doesn't seem to stop people from wanting to do that. I mean, I think people should want to die, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to talk myself into circles.
It's an exciting journey ahead of us, though, that is into that dark corner or the unknown that we want to avoid. Couple thoughts you triggered there. I read this study that was done, and it was surveys. She said, if you talk to people in their final hours, and there was a bunch of, and you may be very familiar with this, or it may have been updated. You may be able to correct this, because this is old. This was in an older book. But if I remember right, they surveyed hundreds of folks in the final days of their life, and just opened up, like, talk to me about your life. And, maybe I think something in that conversation was like, maybe things you would have done differently. And there were lots of different answers, but there were 3 answers that emerged like substantially more than other answers, right? So you got hundreds of answers, but 3 just really stand out if you graph them. And one was to risk more. Which is interesting in what you're saying, like when we want to avoid death or be about safety. Like, safety is probably not a good governing principle for really anything, I don't think. I don't think so. So anyway, but that was one of them. I would risk more. One of them is I would reflect more. Like, I wish I'd have stopped more and been like, think about what's going on here. I would reflect more. And then the last one was, I wish I'd done more things that would live on after me. I choke up even saying that I would have spent myself on something that will continue to be a blessing to my family and to my community when I'm gone. Yeah. And I think, man, something in there is something like a thirst for eternal life. Like, I want to live on after me, legacy, something like that. But even more, I just thought, man, how that relates to what we give our time to, what we give our work to, what we spend ourselves on, and what the collective wisdom of the dying tell us about how we spend these years when we're not in those final days. And I've just thought a lot about those reflections. I don't know if you want to, I just want to share with you. I don't know if you want to say anything about that or speak to that at all.
Yeah, I do like that. I like thinking through that way. And I think that's very important in our culture, which is so production centered, but not necessarily a production of something that leaves a legacy, just like produce whatever I told you you're supposed to produce in this moment. And it doesn't matter how you feel about it because you have more to produce over here, and just keep going, keep going, keep going. And the frenetic pace that we've been kind of shocked out of in some ways through the pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a gift. Yeah.
In some ways it's a gift, and for the extroverts of us, it's a little bit of a challenge, like me not being with other people in the same room is really, it's hard. And I'm with my family, but my family is also like all together all the time. And my children sometimes probably don't appreciate this extra time with their parents.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But there's something lovely about being able to be together as a family too, which is, not bad for my family, but probably not great for some other people who are suffering.
Oh, that's 100% the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very difficult time, but it also is shocking us in some ways out of a ridiculous schedule and pace that we expect of ourselves. And that's one of the things my students get from being in the DR. Like, that life doesn't have to be scheduled by every minute on the calendar. Like, I could just sit and be for an hour and chat with someone, and that's totally okay. And it's more than just okay. It's actually edifying and fruitful in a different kind of way. And so I think if I were to want to leave some kind of legacy, it would maybe even be in like instilling a way of being as opposed to like a physical thing. Physical things just go away. It'll burn, it'll be windswept, it'll be lost in a financial collapse or whatever. But if my kids can learn to if my kids can accept that they've been blessed and can be a blessing to others, that's been my prayer for my kids all along, that they would be great in the economy of another kind of kingdom, of another sort of way of looking at things, that their greatness wouldn't be determined by this, frenetic production centered culture, but by being blessed and being a blessing, by a conduit of love.
I love it. So as you talk about this season we're going through, one of the things that's really, I've just constantly circled back to is when I heard this, it just hit me really hard. So quarantine, like etymology of the word, is from 40 days. And it is a reference to this 40 days in the wilderness that Jesus spends before he really begins his public ministry, and basically goes to the wilderness to like wrestle the devil, basically just be tempted and without. And we, or Christians throughout the world, remember that time in the liturgical calendar as before Easter. We have this 40 days of Lent, which overlapped with the beginning of this quarantine. And I have been really interested, as you just talked about the experience of quarantine. If you look back at what you're saying, you're like, stop this frenetic pace. You're back with your family and community. Like, in many ways, you're fasting, whether you wanted to or not. You're fasting from those social interactions that you want as an extrovert. You're doing without so many of these things that you're used to. Oh, and by the way, why are we quarantined? Because of death. Because we're afraid of something that's going to kill us. And so there's this reflection on the fragility of life and mortality that is literally baked into the season of Lent. Like, that's like, from dust we come, to dust we return, is the reflection of Lent. And what has really been powerful to me is to go, man, like, Christian, not Christian, whatever, like the globe has been given the gift that many Christians have been celebrating for some time, is this time of, I'm like, we're in Lent. Like, we were given Lent, and what new world emerges on the other side of this is yet to be seen. And some of us are terrified and some of us are really excited. And maybe that just has something to do with temperament or faith or hope or whatever, but like, something will emerge from this. And, and I just, as you were talking through that, I was like, oh man, it's like I haven't said this yet, but like you're fleshing it out completely. As you like say what this has been to us and where it's put us into, like, a death has been unavoidable.
Yeah.
It's been the popular conversation now.
Yeah.
And so we've been, where you go, we avoid this and avoid this and avoid this. I mean, we're still avoiding it kind of very actively, but it has been made conscious in a way that,
yeah, it's a little less avoidable at this point. When 220,000 people and counting have died of a virus in our country, that does put death in the news, puts it on people's minds, it brings it up as a topic, and I hadn't even thought about, I like the way you put that together in terms of quarantine and like a Lenten fasting kind of season and what comes from that, because I really get bothered by I want to go back to the way things were.
Yeah.
That really frustrates me. I think that frustrates me as someone who has, for the last 18 years, not lived like everyone else around me is living.
Yep.
I mean, my child has long-term disabilities, uses a wheelchair, has to be protected in any year we would be concerned and protective during flu season and taking him out into public spaces where we are aware and cautious all the time of those kinds of things. And so now, obviously, all the more, but to the point where we can't let anybody else come into our home. He's doing virtual education, which is a real trip, let me tell you, for him, particularly because he has to have someone sit with him in order to navigate that online space. And what would typically be like 7 different people who come into the classroom on a regular basis to engage with him in various ways is down to a screen and a grandparent, typically, like sitting with him, helping him. And so this has been really a hard time for us, but just to go back to the way things were doesn't acknowledge that the way things were was not great for everyone. And what if things could be better? What if instead of just trying to forget this whole mess, we learned from it and did something different going forward? And I do think that will happen. I think that there will be certain habits that got broken that don't get picked back up. Like maybe I don't want like 17 activities, I
think every one of us could rattle off like, well, this is how this is going to go from now on. Like, thank God for this lesson.
Right. Or like this conversation that we're having online, I meet with people on a regular basis in England now. Yeah. Like this. I have guest lectures in my class from other countries. Yep. It's easy. It's great. They're accessible. Everybody's like enjoying this kind of connectivity from people who can't and never or couldn't previously share any kind of physical space. But now we're connected in ways because it's become a common habit that even though we're a mile apart or whatever, we're still online talking because it's a safer format. I might have a meeting like this later with somebody who's in this building because this is how we're now accustomed to doing things. And so I don't want to have every meeting for the rest of my life like this. I would love to sit in the room with you at some point and like pull the book off your shelf as opposed to just seeing it sitting over there. That would be really fun. You can come over and we'll play Legos, because I have all these Lego things. So
love it.
I want that, but I also know that by practicing this, it's given me skills that are transferable to some things that I'll be able to do, from here on out. And that's a really good thing. But I think there are other practices and things that we've learned that maybe won't come to light for a while still. I also think that I told somebody the other day, I feel like we want ourselves to be in like mile 20 of the marathon. and it's really possible that we're only in mile 10. And that scares me, when people just are going to dip out of this race and be like, no, because I don't know, this is going to be hard and long, and Americans are not good with the long, hard haul. Like, the suffering thing is not something we really, I remember that Advil commercial from a long time ago, I haven't got time for the pain. We don't have time for this. We have to be productive and busy, and this is forcing us not to be.
It's maybe you get the medicine you need.
Mm.
Yeah. Wow.
I think this would be a podcast, John.
We're going to have to do it again. Thank you so much for doing this. If you would, before we go, I want to give you a chance to talk to those that are listening. Are there places you want to point them, something you want to tell them to do or ask for, places they can find you, if like online or whatever?
Yeah. Well, I have like the most Googleable name in the world. So there's me, Lindy Davidson. There's like an artist in Australia, Lindy Davidson. And then there's a rabbi in California, Lindy Davidson. So I'm the East Coast Protestant Lindy Davidson, while there's a West Coast Rabbi Lindy Davidson. It's Lindy Davidson. But I'm at USF, so you can find me in the Judy Genshaft Honors College on our website, which is usf.edu/honors, and that'll introduce you to all that's happening here in the Honors College. And then I would say, what else? Oh, and then for end of life stuff, if people are really interested in that, I would really encourage you to look at the Conversation Project, which is an initiative that seeks to foster conversations with their family, like among friends and families, about end of life that help people to be more prepared to become a decision maker. Because the worst thing you want is to have this emergency surprise. You find out that you're the next of kin or have been earmarked as the decision maker, and you don't know what that person wants. That's a really difficult place to be in. And so the Conversation Project seeks to kind of foreground some of those events by giving people openings to have conversations with others. And you could just Google the Conversation Project and their website will come right up. So I would encourage people to look at that as a resource and a way to maybe investigate some more of what we've talked about.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Good to talk to you, John.
You too. I miss talking to you. I'm like her. So for those listening, her and I have sat and done this just in the cafeteria at USF a few times, and I'm like, I'm glad it's getting captured though. Getting it recorded here. But cool. Well, till next time.
All right.
Thank you.